The hush of a red-eye flight has a rhythm all its own. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, passengers drift into the soft blue glow of the cabin, their heads heavy with sleep, their bodies lulled by the hum of jet engines. On Flight 401 from Los Angeles to New York, that rhythm was in full effect. But in Seat 2A, something far more important than sleep was taking place. It began with a whisper, a child's whisper. "Daddy, I'm cold." 8-year-old Lena Brooks curled closer to her father, her tiny frame barely wrapped in the soft cotton of her travel hoodie. Her voice was muffled by fatigue, but it cut straight through the white noise of the cabin to Elliot Brooks' heart. To the world, Elliot looked like a man who blended in a well-built figure in a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and a calm, steady gaze. What no one around him knew was that he was the founder and CEO of Meridian Air, the very airline operating the flight they were on. And tonight he wasn't traveling in a suit or under fanfare. He was there quietly, intentionally as a passenger, a father, and an observer. Since the passing of his wife 3 years earlier, Elliot had become both anchor and sail for Lena. Every trip, every moment spent with her was sacred. He had learned to read her needs in the subtlest sign, a furrowed brow, a sudden quiet, a glance toward the window. So when she said she was cold, Elliot didn't hesitate. He gently raised a hand to signal the flight attendant. The woman who approached, Carol Hayes, was poised and polished. Her name tag sat neatly on her pressed uniform. Her blonde hair was styled with almost military precision. But beneath the professional exterior was a cold efficiency, not warmth. "Excuse me," Elliot said kindly. "My daughter's cold. Could we get a blanket, please?" Carol barely looked at Lena. Her eyes scanned Elliot's casual clothes before landing squarely on his face. Her tone was practiced, distant. "I'm sorry, sir. Blankets are pre-assigned and we don't carry extras in domestic first class." "It's policy." Elliot remained composed. He glanced across the aisle and gestured subtly toward the empty seat where a plastic-wrapped blanket and pillow lay untouched. "No one's in that seat," he said calmly. Would it be possible to use that blanket for her? Carol's smile didn't reach her eyes. "That seat may be needed for a last-minute boarding. We can remove amenities once they're assigned, but the doors are closed." "We're already at cruising altitude," Elliot said gently, not pressing, but pointing out the obvious. Carol's voice dropped slightly, now laced with condescension. "Perhaps next time, sir, you should bring a warmer jacket for your daughter." That moment, so small and so sharp, pierced deeper than any turbulence. It wasn't just a refusal of a blanket. It was a quiet judgment, a dismissal, not of the request but of who had made it. Carol hadn't seen a CEO. She hadn't seen a father. She had seen a man in casual clothes and a little girl who didn't in her eyes belong in first class. What she didn't realize was that she wasn't just interacting with a passenger. She was interacting with the man who had built this airline from the ground up. Elliot didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He wrapped his arms around Lena, held her close, and removed his own hoodie to cover her shoulders. But as he did, he watched. He took mental notes. Because this wasn't just about service, it was about culture. And what had just unfolded in row 2 was not a policy issue. It was a failure of empathy, a crack in the foundation of the very values Meridian Air claimed to uphold. As Lena drifted back to sleep in his hoodie, clutching her stuffed bird, Sky Elliott sat awake in the cold cabin, quietly replaying every word. He didn't need to speak to HR or legal just yet, but something had shifted. What began as a father's simple request had revealed something much darker, a rot that could no longer be ignored. At 35,000 feet, the air was thin, but Elliot Brooks' resolve had never been sharper. He knew one truth: kindness isn't optional. It's structural. And come morning, something was going to change, starting with a blanket. The hum of the aircraft grew quieter as passengers slipped deeper into sleep. Outside, a black velvet sky stretched endlessly beyond the windows. But inside seat 2A, Elliot Brooks was wide awake. With Lena now resting against him, wrapped in his hoodie, her tiny fingers clutched around her plush. Toy Elliot stared at the untouched blanket across the aisle, like it was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. He hadn't planned to observe tonight. He hadn't planned anything more than a quiet return home. But now he was watching with the eyes of a founder, a father, and a man who had spent over 15 years trying to build not just an airline, but a philosophy. Meridian Air wasn't meant to be a carrier. It was meant to be a culture. a flying embodiment of dignity, elegance, and care. But what had just happened proved something was broken. And what was worse, it had likely been broken for longer than anyone had dared to admit. He pulled out his phone, careful not to disturb Lena. The cabin was still. The flight crew, with the exception of Carol, had disappeared into their side galleys. Elliot tapped the screen and opened the Meridian Personnel APAN executive-only portal, built to track employee data in real time. He searched the name on Carol's badge, Carol Hayes. The results were immediate: 19 years of service, dozens of completed flight rotations, but something in her record caught his eye. While the early years were spotless, even commendable, the last 7 showed a slow but consistent accumulation of complaints, cold demeanor, lack of flexibility, hostile tone with elderly passenger, and on multiple occasions, inappropriate judgment. Still, none of those notes had escalated into formal disciplinary action. Why seniority, he assumed? A culture of passivity, mid-level managers avoiding confrontation. His jaw tightened. This woman had been corroding his brand from the inside for years, and no one had stopped her. Elliot leaned back slightly, eyes scanning the cabin. He spotted a young flight attendant, a few rows up, engaged in conversation with an elderly passenger near the galley. The young man had a warm expression, his posture relaxed but attentive. When he noticed Elliot's glance, he nodded politely. His name tag read Lucas Tran. A few moments later, Lucas walked past row 2, again quietly checking on passengers. He paused near Elliot's seat, his voice low. "Sir," he said gently, "do you need anything?" Elliot hesitated, then replied, "Are there any extra blankets available on board?" Lucas tilted his head, slightly confused. "Yes, sir. I stocked the forward galley before takeoff. We always carry a few extras in case of passenger needs, especially on overnight flights." Elliot said nothing at first. He looked him directly in the eyes. "Thank you, Lucas. That's very helpful." Lucas gave a short, respectful nod and moved on, clearly unaware of the magnitude of what he'd just confirmed. Carol had lied, not bent the truth, not misunderstood policy, lied, flat out, intentionally, and without remorse. Elliot turned his attention to the passengers seated around him. 2 rows ahead, a well-known tech investor sipped red wine, completely oblivious. To the left, a woman was wrapped in a thick shawl, peacefully asleep, and to the right, still draped over the empty seat, was that pristine, unused blanket. His daughter had shivered while comfort lay less than 3 feet away. The shame wasn't hers. It was the airline's. It was his. But shame alone wasn't enough. Action was necessary. And Elliot didn't believe in grandstanding. He believed in systems, processes, culture. And so at 3:12 a.m. somewhere over Kansas, the CEO of Meridian Air composed the most important email of the year. Not to the public, not to the media, but to 3 people who mattered: Janelle Rivers, EVP of In-Flight Experience, Mark O'Donnell, Chief Legal Officer, and Samantha Wu, Head of People and Culture. The subject line was short: AA 401, immediate review required. The email itself was clinical. He outlined the timeline of events: the exchange, the refusal, the fabricated excuse, the refusal of another passenger's offer to lend a shawl on the basis of cross-contamination protocol, which didn't exist. He detailed the judgmental tone in Carol's suggestion that he pack a warmer jacket next time. He quoted verbatim. He added links to her complaint history. He named Lucas Tran and described his calm demeanor and factual correction. And finally he wrote, "This is not about an amenity. This is about a breakdown of empathy in our first-class cabin. It's about who we are as a company when no one's watching. We need to address this not as an isolated lapse, but as a pattern and a culture risk." He hit send. Then he waited. The reply came within 8 minutes from Samantha Wu herself. "Understood. I'll have full records and flight data prepared for your arrival. Shall we convene in the Skybridge Lounge at JFK?" Elliot responded. "Make it the executive wing. I'll need a full list of the AA 401 crew boss, senior and junior." Just then Lena stirred beside him. Her eyes fluttered open. "Are we there yet?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep. "Almost," he whispered, brushing a curl away from her cheek. She smiled and nestled deeper into the hoodie, unaware of the storm that had broken somewhere between California and New York. By the time the aircraft began its descent, the entire flight crew had resumed their duties. Carol, confident that the issue had been buried beneath silence, moved down the aisle with renewed cheerfulness. She offered juice to one passenger, smiled broadly at a woman in pearls, and avoided Elliot's row entirely. Lucas, however, paused discreetly near 2A. "Let me know if she needs anything else before landing," he said quietly, gesturing to Lena. Elliot looked up. "Thank you, Lucas. You've handled yourself with real professionalism tonight." Lucas smiled, unsure of what that really meant, but he would soon find out. The landing was smooth, uneventful. As the cabin lights came back up and passengers retrieved their belongings, Carol returned to the exit door, resuming her post as lead. She straightened her uniform, applied fresh gloss to her lips, and waited to dispense corporate-approved smiles as the first-class passengers deplaned. What she did not expect was the scene waiting just beyond the jet bridge. Standing directly outside the aircraft door was a welcoming party, but not for a celebrity or a senator. This was an internal response team. Elliot's executive assistant had arranged everything with surgical precision: 2 senior HR officers, a gate manager, and the director of in-flight personnel for the JFK hub. Carol blinked. Her mind whirred. Was there some kind of security issue? A VIP boarding, then her eyes found Elliot. He was standing right in front of her, with Lena at his side, her small hand wrapped in his. "Good morning," Elliot said to the HR director, his voice calm. "Mr. Brooks," the man replied, straightening. "We're ready." Carol's knees buckled. "Mr. Brooks," she repeated under her breath. It took her 2 full seconds to place the name on every executive memo, every company newsletter, the name on the paychecks. Elliot Brooks, the man she had refused a blanket, the man whose daughter she had made shiver. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Elliot didn't acknowledge her. He turned to Lucas, who had just exited the aircraft with his service bag slung over his shoulder. "Lucas Tran," Elliot said, "could I ask you to join us for a quick debrief? We'll be in the Skybridge Lounge." Lucas blinked. Yes, of course." Carol stood frozen in place as Elliot and Lena walked into the terminal, flanked by leadership. The man she'd dismissed had just dismissed her, and this was only the beginning. The Skybridge Executive Lounge at JFK was quiet, eerily so, for a space that usually hummed with the low cadence of business travelers, the clink of espresso cups, and the occasional rustle of newspapers. But this morning at 6:14 a.m., the lounge had been reserved for something far more personal, far more consequential. Behind the frosted glass doors of its private conference room, the future of Meridian Air was about to shift. Elliot Brooks sat at the far end of the polished walnut table, dressed now in a navy quarter, zip and slacks, still casual, but undeniably composed. Beside him, nestled in a plush lounge chair with hot chocolate in hand and her stuffed bird Sky in her lap, was 8-year-old Lena. The room smelled faintly of cinnamon coffee and expensive leather, but beneath it all was the unmistakable tension of accountability. Across from Elliot sat 2 empty chairs. Carol Hayes and Lucas Tran had just arrived. The HR director, Samantha Wu, greeted them at the door. Her voice was neutral but firm. "This way, please." Carol moved stiffly as though each step required effort. Her face had drained of color. There was no trace of the crisp, commanding lead flight attendant demeanor she wore so confidently just hours before. Now she clutched her handbag like a shield. Lucas, in contrast, looked uncertain, but not afraid. His expression was open, concerned, and maybe a little confused. He'd been summoned alongside Carol, and though he sensed the gravity of what had happened, he didn't know why he was here, or what would come next. The 2 sat down. Elliot let the silence hang for a few seconds. He knew silence could be louder than scolding, and in this moment he wasn't just a CEO. He was a father, a leader, and a man deeply disappointed. Finally he spoke, his tone calm, deliberate. "Miss Hayes, Mr. Tran, thank you for coming." Neither replied. Elliot continued, folding his hands on the table. "Before I say anything further, I want to make one thing clear. This isn't a trial, it's a conversation. But it's one that will have consequences because culture begins and ends with the people we trust to carry it forward." He looked at Carol. "Miss Hayes, I've reviewed the details of last night's flight. Your words, your conduct, your history with Meridian. And the more I looked, the more I saw a pattern of selective service dismissal of certain passengers and a rigid, often unkind interpretation of policy. Is that a fair assessment? Carol's lips parted, but no sound came. He continued, last night you refused a blanket to a child, not because there were none available, but because you decided on your own that she didn't deserve it. And when another passenger attempted to offer kindness, you shut it down, citing a non-existent health protocol. Your behavior wasn't just negligent. It was in direct violation of the values this company was built on. I didn't, Carol finally stammered, her voice hoarse. I didn't know who you were. That's exactly the problem, Elliot said, his voice still gentle. You shouldn't have to know someone's title to treat them with dignity. He paused. Let that sit. Mr. Tran. Elliot turned now to Lucas, who straightened in his seat. I want to thank you. You spoke up. You told the truth even when it meant contradicting your senior. And you did it respectfully without drawing attention to yourself. That matters more than you know. Lucas swallowed hard. I was just trying to help, sir. You did more than that, Elliot said. You upheld the standard. He stood and walked to the window, the skyline of Queens rising in the distance as morning broke. When I started Billionaire, he said, I promised myself this wouldn't just be a business. It would be a reflection of what travel should feel like, welcoming, warm, and human. Somewhere along the way, we let seniority replace sincerity. That ends today. He turned. Miss Hayes, he said softly, your employment with Billionaire is terminated effective immediately. You'll receive your severance and support as outlined in your contract, but you will no longer represent this airline. Carol gasped at a quiet, strangled sound. She didn't plead. She didn't argue. She simply nodded as if she had already known the moment she saw the little girl curled in his arms that the career she had built was coming to a close. Samantha Wu stood and gently gestured for Carol to exit. Well, handle everything, she said kindly. As Carol rose and made her way to the door, she passed by Lena, who looked up at her, eyes wide, innocent, but unafraid. And in that look, Carol saw the weight of what she had done. She had made a child feel small, and that was something no policy could excuse. She left the room. When the door closed, Elliot took a deep breath and turned back to Lucas. What's your current title, flight attendant? Level 2. How long with the company? Almost 4 years, sir. Elliot nodded. Not anymore. As of today, you are being promoted to Lead Flight Experience Specialist, effective immediately. But I have another task for you, something far more important. Lucas blinked. Sir, we're creating a new training program, not just a policy update, a philosophy shift, and I want you to lead it. It'll be called the Lena Standard. Every flight attendant, from new recruits to 20-year veterans, will go through it. It'll be rooted in real-life scenarios, empathy training, and the non-negotiable principle that every person in every seat deserves to be seen. Lucas stared, stunned. Sir M honored. I don't even know what to say. You don't need to say anything. Just do what you did last night, Elliot replied. Lead with kindness. The Lena Standard rolled out 3 months later. It was unlike anything the industry had seen. Not just slides and rules, but immersive training simulations, role-playing exercises, recorded scenarios, eye-tracking VR headsets that helped attendants see how their own gaze often skipped over passengers in less polished attire. At the heart of it all was a case study, Flight 401, the missed blanket, the refusal, the redemption. Lena's story became a touchstone, her name a gentle reminder, not of weakness, but of why they serve. Each training ended with the same phrase: it starts with a blanket. It ends with a standard. Back in Chicago, Elliot returned to his office, a high-rise suite with sweeping views of Lake Michigan, and placed something new on his desk, a framed photograph of Lena asleep under his hoodie. Sky, the bird, cradled in her arms. Next to it, a soft fleece blanket newly commissioned for all Meridian cabins, embroidered with a rising bird stitched in silver thread. Passengers noticed and posted. Courtroom, the Lena Standard began trending. Letters poured in from customers, single mothers, disabled veterans, even flight attendants from rival airlines, sharing their own stories of how empathy, or the lack of it, shaped their journeys. Crew morale soared. Complaint volume plummeted. Loyalty scores hit an all-time high. But Elliot didn't measure success in metrics. He measured it in moments. Like the moment a new trainee asked him, Mr. Brooks, is Lena real? She is more than real, he smiled. She's the reason we remember what this job is for. It started with whispers. A passenger on Flight 718 to Denver posted a photo of a flight attendant kneeling beside a young boy with autism, handing him a cream-colored blanket embroidered with a silver bird. The caption read, "She said it was a magic blanket. Told him it helped birds fly through the clouds when they were scared." He smiled for the first time all day. "Thank you," chanted the Lena Standard. Then came another. A grandmother on a red-eye from Seattle to Miami wrote about a flight attendant who noticed her struggling with her seatbelt. Instead of brushing past, the attendant offered her a warm blanket and a gentle, "Take your time, Mom." It wasn't the service itself that stood out. It was the tone, the dignity, the grace, and soon what began as a quiet internal program within Meridian Air began to catch fire across the industry. Social media took notice. So did passengers. But so did other airlines. At first, competitors scoffed. The CCO of one major airline during a private conference call dismissed the Lena Standard as empathy theater. He claimed customers didn't care about blankets, they cared about on-time arrivals and frequent flyer points. But then the numbers came in. By the fourth quarter after launch, Meridian's passenger satisfaction score had jumped 18%. Employee attrition had dropped by nearly 30%. And in what shocked the analysts, most net revenue per available seat mile increased despite zero change in ticket pricing. Why? Because people were choosing Meridian on purpose. It wasn't about perks. It was about trust. When a grandmother had to send her 12-year-old grandson to visit family across the country, she picked the airline with the silver bird blanket. When a businesswoman recovering from cancer had her first flight post-treatment, she chose the one whose staff had been trained not just in procedure, but in compassion. And still, Elliot Brooks remained silent in the media. He gave no interviews. He made no speeches. The story wasn't about him. It never had been. But that didn't stop the calls from coming. Morning shows wanted an exclusive. Business magazines wanted his insights. One national anchor even described him as the quiet reformer flying above the noise. Still, he declined. Instead, he told his team, "Let the results speak. Let the blankets speak. Let the people feel it before we talk about it." And the people did. Passengers began to collect the blankets, not to resell, but to remember. Photos of children snuggling under the cream fleece at home flooded Instagram and Facebook. Some passengers folded them like mementos. Others wrote poems, notes, or prayers into the trim. One elderly couple from Ohio, married for 52 years, wrote Elliot a handwritten letter after a flight to Phoenix Weave, flown for decades. "This is the first time we felt like someone truly saw us. Not as seats, not as seniors, but as people. Whoever Lena is, please tell her she made a couple of old hearts feel young again." Elliot framed the letter, and as the impact grew, so did the responsibility. He assembled a small team, one that didn't come from marketing or operations, but from customer experience and ethics. Their goal to preserve the purity of the program. No sponsorships, no celebrity endorsements, no exploitative campaigns, only stories, only action. Meanwhile, back at Meridian's training center in Chicago, Lucas Tran had become something of a quiet celebrity among staff. He didn't act like it. He still wore the same beat-up boots he'd worn when he was a junior crew member, still held doors, still took the shuttle with the trainees. But when he spoke, people listened. His workshops were now part of mandatory onboarding for all in-flight staff and for corporate leadership. One of the modules, titled the Seat 2A Perspective, asked executives to simulate a flight from the viewpoint of a parent traveling alone with a child. Another module, Blanket Moments, shared anonymized stories of past service failures and asked crew to respond in real time with empathy and strategy. Some cried, others sat in silence. All of them walked away changed. Elliot, who occasionally sat in the back during sessions, once told his chief culture officer, "This is the closest we've ever come to teaching heart." And yet the most remarkable part of it all, the true miracle, was that Lena had no idea. To her, the whole thing was still just about a cold airplane, a warm hoodie, and a bird named Sky. Elliot never told her about Carol's termination, never told her about the meetings, the interviews, or the executives who quoted her name in boardrooms. He didn't want her to carry the weight of it, but Lena had begun to notice the blankets. On a flight to visit her aunt in San Francisco, she leaned over to her dad, holding the soft fabric in her hand. "Daddy, this is the same kind of blanket as before, right?" "Yes," he replied. "It has a bird on it," she said. "Like Sky." Elliot smiled. "I guess it does." She paused. "Did you make these?" "I helped," he said honestly. She looked satisfied with that answer, then curled up under it and fell asleep. That moment, quiet and unseen, meant more to Elliot than any stock price ever could. The ripple continued outward. Other airlines, once skeptical, began quietly contacting Meridian's HR team for collaborative insights. A few launched their own versions of kindness protocols, though few carried the same sincerity. The press began to refer to them as blanket copycats. Elliot, as always, stayed out of it. But one thing was clear. A line had been drawn. From now on, kindness wasn't a bonus. It was expected. Then one day, 2 years after Flight 401, Elliot received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a simple folded card. "Dear Mr. Brooks, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to remember me. But I remember Lena. And I remember the look on her face when I said no. I work at a community shelter now. I fold blankets every morning. And I never forget the ones I refuse to give. CH." Elliot read the card once, then again, and then tucked it into the drawer beneath his desk, not as an absolution, but as a reminder. Not everyone learns the lesson, but sometimes they do. That night, back in their home overlooking Lake Michigan, Lena curled up next to Elliot on the couch, now 10 years old, reading aloud from a library book on famous inventions. "Daddy," she asked, "did anyone ever invent kindness?" Elliot looked down at her, his arm wrapped around her shoulder. "No," he said, "but maybe someone finally remembered how important it was." She nodded, satisfied. And across the world, tens of thousands of blankets were folded into seat pockets, ready for the next cold passenger, the next scared child, the next moment that needed more than service. It needed heart. It needed the Lena standard. By the time Lena Brooks turned 12, the silver bird had become more than just a symbol on a blanket. It had become a quiet revolution. Across flights from Boston to Bangkok, crew members now referred to blanket moments as shorthand for moments that required more than service. They required heart. Senior attendants quoted phrases from the Lena standard like scripture. Entire seminars were dedicated to the Seat 2A mindset. Even industry panels, once focused solely on margins and metrics, now began to include sessions titled The Empathy Economy. And yet, through it all, Lena remained mostly unaware of the legacy she had inspired. Mostly. One evening, while curled up in her dad's office at home, her favorite place to read, she noticed a framed letter on the bookshelf. It was written in careful script, and her name was at the top. To Lena, it read, "You don't know me, but your story made its way to our school in Nairobi. My teacher showed us a video of a flight attendant handing a blanket to a frightened girl. We don't have planes here, but I told my little sister that if we ever fly, I want it to be with people like that. Thank you. Asha, age 11." Lena put the letter down, her brows furrowed. She turned to her dad, who sat reviewing route data on a second monitor, oblivious to her discovery. "Daddy, who's Asha?" Elliot paused. He looked over his shoulder, studied her face, then smiled gently. "She's a little girl, about your age, from Kenya. She wrote that a few years ago after learning about something that happened to you." To me, he exhaled slowly and set his laptop aside. "Lena, do you remember that time when you were younger? Maybe 8, when we flew back from Grandma's house, and it was really cold on the plane?" She thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, you gave me your hoodie." "That's right," he said. "And do you remember asking for a blanket?" Her face scrunched in thought. "No, not really." He chuckled softly. "That's okay. You wouldn't. But I do." He leaned forward. "You see that moment when someone decided not to help us and another person chose to do the right thing? It became a turning point for a lot of people, especially here at Meridian." She blinked. "Because of me," he nodded. "Because of your cold little shoulders, a whole company remembered how to treat people better." She was quiet. "Then why didn't you tell me before I wanted you to grow up without that weight? I didn't want the world to change how you see yourself before you were ready to understand it." Lena looked down at her lap. "I don't know what to feel." "That's okay too," Elliot said. "Just promise me one thing. Never let it change how kind you are. People will look at you differently now. Some will admire you, others may expect things. But who you are inside, that's your real story. She nodded, not with certainty, but with trust. And Elliot knew a new chapter was beginning. A few months later at Meridian Air's 20th anniversary gala, Elliot took the stage for what was supposed to be a routine CEO keynote. But something shifted in him that night. He saw the audience, industry peers, employees, investors, press, and realized they didn't just want updates. They wanted a glimpse of meaning. So halfway through his speech, Elliot paused. Most of you know our service model. Many of you know the phrase, the Lena Standard. What many of you may not know is Lena is my daughter. A ripple swept through the crowd. She didn't do anything extraordinary. She didn't lead a protest or build a program. She just got cold, and someone decided that wasn't their problem. He looked out over the ballroom, his voice steady. But it was. It was our problem. And it woke us up to something that should never have been forgotten in the first place. That small moments are big moments, and dignity is not a policy, it's a promise. He paused, then added softly, "She's here tonight. And she has no idea I was going to say this." Lena, seated near the back, flushed crimson as dozens of heads turned toward her. Elliot smiled gently. "Let's not clap for her. Let's clap for the moments she helped us notice." And the room did just that. Over the next year, speaking invitations came not for Elliot but for Lena. Educational foundations, youth leadership panels, even a congressional roundtable on customer experience and corporate responsibility. At first, she turned them down. She was a kid. She wanted to play cello, read graphic novels, and go to science camp, not stand behind podiums. But one invitation changed that. It came from a fifth-grade teacher in Chicago's South Side. A woman named Ms. Danvers wrote a letter. "Our girls don't have a lot of role models who look like them and get celebrated for things like kindness. Not athletics, not beauty, just simple, real-world kindness. Lena, if you spoke to them, even for 10 minutes, I think it would change how they see themselves." Lena read the letter 3 times. Then she turned to her father and said, "Okay, just this one." Standing in front of 25 fifth-grade girls in a community center classroom, Lena Brooks didn't feel like a symbol. She felt nervous, ordinary, unsure. But as she told them the story of a cold plane, a stranger's refusal, and her father's quiet decision to fix something broken, she saw their eyes light up. One girl raised her hand and said, "So being brave can be just asking for a blanket?" Lena smiled. "Sometimes yes, and sometimes being brave is giving one." From that moment, she knew she could handle more. But Elliot, he wasn't so sure. That night back home, Elliot stood on their balcony, watching planes descend into O'Hare. Lena joined him, wrapped in a shawl and sipping tea. "Daddy," she said, "do you ever get scared?" He looked at her surprised. "Scared of what? Of me becoming something bigger than what we planned?" He considered his answer carefully. "I don't get scared of who you'll become," he said slowly. "But I get scared of what the world will ask you to be. They'll want a brand, a story, a headline." She nodded. "And you want me to stay me." "Exactly," she set her cup down. "Then let me be both. Let me tell the truth. Let me remind people that kindness doesn't need a press release. It just needs a person." He looked at her, and realized something vital: she wasn't becoming a leader. She already was one. Not because she asked for it, but because she understood its weight and still chose to carry it. That fall, Lena joined her father on a flight to Washington, D.C., where Meridian Air was being honored by the U.S. Department of Transportation for its pioneering work in service culture reform. During the ceremony, Elliot gave a brief speech and then surprised the room by stepping aside. "I'd like you to hear from the person who inspired it all." Lena took the podium in a simple navy dress, her posture straight, her voice clear. "I'm not here because I'm special," she began. "I'm here because someone noticed when I wasn't." She looked around the room at pilots, attendants, regulators, reporters. "What we build, airlines, companies, systems, it only works if we remember the people inside it. I was a cold little girl once. I still remember that. So when you make your decisions, I hope you think about people like me." She paused, "because we're everywhere, and we're watching." The room went still, then thundered in applause. By the time Lena Brooks was 13, her life had changed in ways even her father couldn't have predicted. She had spoken at the Department of Transportation. She had been invited to the White House twice. A video of her speech at a youth summit had reached over 9 million views on YouTube. And with every milestone, the question Elliot Brooks had once tried so hard to avoid came back louder, sharper, and more impossible to ignore. Who is this girl really, and what makes her so special? In the beginning, most people celebrated her story. A soft-spoken child born not into fame, but into empathy, who had inspired systemic change without ever meaning to. It was the kind of tale America loved, humble, heartwarming, full of quiet dignity. But fame, even the accidental kind, never stays quiet for long. One morning, Lena woke up to find her face plastered across a morning show segment titled "The Kindness Kid Genuine Icon" or "Manufactured Myth." The host smiled as she read a quote from an anonymous airline source, questioning whether Lena's story had been overstated for branding purposes. Elliot watched from the kitchen, his coffee cooling, untouched on the counter. The host went on. Meridian Air's customer satisfaction is up 22% since the launch of the Lena standard. But is this heartfelt or just high-level marketing? Lena entered the room seconds later, still groggy from sleep. She saw the screen. She read the headline. And she said nothing. Elliot muted the TV. "You don't have to watch that," he said gently. "I already did," she replied. She poured a bowl of cereal mechanically, then sat at the table across from him. After a long silence, she asked, "Is it true? Did we use it to sell tickets?" Elliot stared at her. Then softly, "We used it to remind people how they should be treated. If that brought more people in, I don't think that's wrong." "But did we ever exaggerate it?" "No," he said firmly. "Not one bit." Lena pushed her cereal around with a spoon. "Then why are they saying that?" "Because the world doesn't like clean stories, especially when they're true." The backlash didn't end there. A popular online columnist wrote a scathing op-ed titled "Blanket Ideology: Why Corporate Morality is Just a Warm Lie." In it, he accused Meridian of leveraging a child's discomfort to craft a PR miracle and questioned whether Lena's entire presence in the public eye was curated by a father's CEO with a flair for narrative manipulation. The comments section exploded. Some defended her, some tore her apart. "She's just a kid," one wrote. "She's a brand in braids," another said. And while Elliot tried to shield her from it, the truth was Lena had already read it all. She didn't cry, but something shifted. She stopped asking to visit the Meridian offices. She turned down new speaking engagements. She spent more time in her room, less time in the sky. Elliot noticed, and it terrified him. He had always feared what the spotlight could do to a child born of an honest moment. But now he feared something worse, that the noise of strangers might drown out the voice Lena had only just found. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He stepped back. For 3 months, Elliot turned his focus inward, retooling operations, building better training infrastructure, investing in internal mental health support for staff, all while giving Lena space. And then one quiet Sunday afternoon, something unexpected happened. Lena walked into his home office with a notepad in hand. "I want to build something," she said. Elliot looked up surprised. "What kind of something?" "A fund," she said, flipping to the first page. "But not for schools or libraries or huge things. For small things, like blankets." He tilted his head. "Explain." She hesitated, then took a breath. "There's this girl at school. Her family just moved from Detroit. She wears the same coat every day, and it's ripped on the sleeve. She gets teased a lot. She never says anything. I want to give her something warm. But not just from me, from all of us." Elliot stood slowly. "You don't need my permission for that," he said. "You just need a name." Lena smiled. "I already have one." She turned the notepad around. At the top, in careful handwriting, it read, "The 2A Project." That winter, the 2A Project quietly launched as a micro-grant initiative designed not for large-scale charity, but for hyper-local acts of warmth. $100 here, $200 there, a jacket, a bus pass, a month of groceries, all requested anonymously, fulfilled through school counselors, community centers, even flight attendants. No press, no headlines, just action. And in doing so, Lena began to reclaim the narrative. Not because she needed to be seen, but because she had something she needed to do. Soon, Meridian began allowing flight crews to submit 2A Project nominations from passengers they encountered, families, struggling students traveling alone. people who needed more than a meal and a movie. One such story came from a flight from Austin to Newark. A new hire named Natalie wrote, "There was a woman in 17C. She was silent most of the flight, except when she asked for water to take medication. I noticed her coat was 5 sizes too big, and she kept glancing at the other passengers. Before landing, she whispered to me, 'Thank you for not looking through me. I'd like to nominate her.'" Lena read that message herself, and she cried. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of understanding. Elliot watched it all unfold with a mix of pride and worry. He knew the attention would return. He knew new reporters would come knocking, and eventually they did. A national documentary crew requested access to do a short film titled Seat 2A, How a Blanket Became a Revolution. Elliot was hesitant, but Lena surprised him. She said yes, but on one condition. "They don't get to tell me who I am," she said. "I do." And so the camera followed her not to red carpets, but to the Southside Community Center, where she volunteered, to the textile warehouse, where she helped pick out new blanket fabric, and to a tiny high school in Minnesota, where she sat in the back row during a talk about youth kindness programs and simply listened. When the film aired 6 months later, critics called it the most human portrait of leadership in a generation. And when the final scene showed Lena walking through a Meridian terminal, anonymously handing a folded blanket to a crying child at Gate C9, the audience didn't cheer. They wept, because the revolution was never loud. It was soft, steady, and warm. Later that night after the premiere, Lena sat beside her dad in the back of their car. "Did I do okay?" she asked. Elliot turned to her and said the same words she had once said to a group of 5th-grade girls. "You reminded them that bravery doesn't have to roar." She smiled, and as they pulled away, the silver logo of Meridian Air glowed on a nearby billboard, not beside an actor or an influencer, but beside a quiet caption that read, "The standard still flies." At 18 years old, Lena Brooks stood in the exact place where it all began, Concourse T Seagate 24, Chicago O'Hare. Same terminal, same airport. But everything else had changed. She had just returned from a year of travel funded, not by a brand deal, but by the 2A Fellowship, a quiet initiative she co-founded with Meridian Support to help youth leaders visit local kindness projects around the world. From orphanages in Peru to rural schools in the Dakotas, Lena had spent her gap year listening, not leading, learning, not lecturing, and now she was back home. At her side, a familiar face. Elliot Brooks' shoulder, now a few more creases near the eyes, a bit more salt than pepper in his beard, stood quietly watching planes roll across the tarmac. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice low. Lena didn't hesitate. "Yes, it's time." They were headed to Meridian's executive headquarters. The board had requested a formal vote. Not for leadership succession. Elliot had made it clear he wouldn't step down until the new decade, but for the creation of a new division, Meridian Human Impact. And they wanted Lena to lead it, not symbolically, operationally. Elliot had resisted at first, but Lena had been clear. "I don't want the company," she'd said. "I want the part of it that remembers who we serve." He couldn't argue with that, so now they stood in silence, waiting for the car that would take them to the meeting that would change everything again. "Dad," Lena said, turning to him. "What if I fail?" Elliot smiled. "Then you'll do what I did. What's that? Learn, adjust, keep flying." She exhaled, nodded once. The car pulled up. In the conference room, 12 members of Meridian's board sat around the polished table, the skyline of Chicago gleaming behind them. Lena entered with quiet composure. No press, no speechwriters, no cameras, just her. She stood at the head of the table and began. "I'm not here because of what happened to me at 8. I'm here because of what happened after." She clicked a remote. On the screen behind her, a photo appeared, taken by a flight attendant in Tulsa. A child curled beneath a cream fleece blanket, a sticker on the trim that read, "You are safe here." "This," Lena said, "is why we still do this. Not because of me, but because this keeps happening, every day, on every route, in ways you don't see on reports." She advanced to the next slide, graphs showing sharp reductions in passenger complaints, burnout among cabin crew, and dramatic increases in repeat customers and long-haul satisfaction scores. "I want Meridian Human Impact to do one thing," she said, Scale dignity, not through ads or slogans, through policy data and people. I want us to work with school counselors, with retirement homes, with shelters. I want us to rethink travel, not just as movement, but as connection. There was a long silence. Then the first board member, an older woman with a reputation for tough questions, spoke. And if it doesn't work, Lena met her gaze. Then we learn. Adjust. Keep flying. Elliot smiled in the back row. The vote passed unanimously. That evening, father and daughter sat on the balcony of their apartment, watching dusk roll over Lake Michigan. "You proud of me?" Lena asked, a teasing lilt in her voice. "Always," Elliot said, "but not because of today." "Why then?" "Because when the world tried to tell you who you were, you didn't let it. You listened to the people no one else did. That's real leadership." She leaned on his shoulder. "Think he'll be ready to run Meridian someday?" He didn't answer right away. "Then you won't run it like I did." She looked up. "Is that a good thing? It's the best thing?" They sat in silence for a while. Then Elliot reached into a drawer beside his chair and handed her a small box. Inside was a folded cream fleece blanket, but this one was different. The silver bird was still there, but embroidered beneath it were 3 words, "It still matters." Lena unfolded it slowly. "Where'd you get this?" "I had it made. Only one like it. I was saving it for when the legacy became yours." She smiled, tears brimming. "Thank you." He shook his head. "No, thank you for proving to me that legacy isn't about what we build. It's about who we trust to carry it." The years passed. Meridian Human Impact became a model across the industry. Lena built partnerships with schools and universities, launched wellness programs for senior travelers, and helped implement a dignity protocol for passengers with memory loss and cognitive conditions. Meanwhile, Elliot began his slow, deliberate transition out of daily operations. He took on a part-time teaching role at a local university, lecturing on leadership ethics and what he called the business of being decent. When Lena turned 25, Elliot officially stepped down, and the chair she sat in was no longer beside him. It was his. On his last flight as a formal executive, Elliot sat in seat 2A, watching the world pass by at 35,000 feet. The same hoodie he'd once wrapped around his daughter now sat folded in his lap. A flight attendant approached, young, eager, nervous. "Mr. Brooks," she said. "Would you like anything to drink?" He smiled. "Just water, thank you." She hesitated. "Sir, I just wanted to say my mom was on one of your flights, back when she was going through chemo. She still keeps her Lena blanket. She says it made her feel human again." Elliot's throat tightened. He nodded once. "Tell her I said thank you." As the flight leveled out, he looked across the aisle. In the empty seat sat another blanket, unfolded, waiting. He reached across and placed it gently on the seat. Not for himself, but for the next person, whoever they were, because the standard still flew, and always would. In a world where loudness often overshadows quiet strength, the story of Elliot and Lena Brooks reminds us that true leadership begins not with a title, but with a simple act of kindness. At 35,000 feet, a father didn't raise his voice. He raised a standard. And through that, a child learned that dignity isn't something we earn by status or appearance, but something every human deserves by birthright. This story teaches us that culture isn't changed by force, but by consistency. It shows that legacies aren't built on big speeches or headlines. They're woven thread by thread in the everyday choices we make to protect and uplift others. For older generations, this is a powerful affirmation. It's never too late to choose compassion, to listen more closely, or to stand quietly but firmly for what is right. We may not run companies or draft policies, but we all have the power to hand someone a metaphorical blanketto, see them, comfort them, and remind them that they matter. In the end, the softest voices often leave the loudest echoes, and sometimes the smallest acts become the legacy we leave behind. What did you think of Lena's journey? Do you believe kindness can really change the culture of a company or even an industry? Elliot built an empire, but it was his daughter who reminded him what truly matters. If you were in Lena's shoes, would you have stepped into the spotlight or stayed behind the scenes? Let us know your thoughts. Should Lena take on more responsibility and lead the airline into a new era of compassion? Or should she continue her work behind the scenes, helping one quiet soul at a time? And what about Elliot? Was it time to fully let go, or is there still one more lesson he needs to teach? Tell us how you would end this story. Or maybe this isn't the end at all. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below, and if you believe in quiet strength, type 1 in the comments. We're listening.